Konnichiwa, and greetings from London. The talk today is on behaviours of concern, whose behaviour and whose concern. And just to kick us off, something to think about, how we frame behaviour, how we think about it. If I see behaviour, it's something I tend to manage, I manage it. Whereas if I see distress, someone is distressed, then I can offer comfort. Our colleague, Professor Bernadette Grosjean, who's an autistic psychiatrist who's now based in the United States, said that it makes this very, very valid point. If you're terrified, self-regulation is impossible. I'm going to consider two narratives now. Jamie, who was described as black, a 15-year-old young man who was tall and athletic, attended a residential special school in a town in southern England where there were very few black people. He was non-speaking with a diagnosis of autism, and he was referred for an opinion on his challenging behaviour. Jamie was described by the school as difficult and dangerous, unpredictable, who disrupted the class by trying to leave lessons and would attack staff if he was prevented from doing this, sometimes causing injuries to these staff. But when we visited Jamie at the school, we met a very different picture. We spoke to a different member of staff, Peter, who worked with Jamie in the non-educational setting, that is the residential part of the school. Peter described Jamie as a great lad, active, good sense of humour, enjoyed running on the beach, trampolining, where he was skillful and enthusiastic. Peter said that the staff who formed a connection with Jamie through his activities framed him quite differently. They enjoyed his company. They were not afraid of him. He was relaxed with people he liked. Peter told us that the sensory overload, problems and the boredom meant that classrooms were difficult for Jamie, and he terminated his being there in ways that he knew. He got up and he left. He was then restrained by staff who were trying to prevent him from leaving, causing him to become upset. Peter recognized these two narratives. So on the one hand, we had Jamie, who was described as difficult and dangerous, and on the other hand, staff regarded him as, with affection, as a great lad. So where do you intervene? Is it with Jamie, or is it with the staff? How was Jamie framed? What was the narrative? Starting with some take-home points, the two gentlemen that are shown in this picture is the Greek philosopher Epictetus and the psychologist Albert Ellis. Both shared very similar views when it came to how we should frame and look at our behaviour. Firstly, that stress causes an emotional response, and those emotional responses can lead to very bad decisions being taken. Bad decisions can themselves cause stress, and so we need to switch from our emotional to our rational mode of responding. I want to show you a short clip now of a mother who was trying to persuade her daughter to clean her teeth, and look for the emotions and how escalation occurs. What is the mental state of the mother? And is this a bad mother? And I want you to think about those. Now, here is the clip.
Come on.
No.
I'm not playing around, Brooke. You need to brush your teeth.
No.
Yes.
No.
Come on.
No, Mom. No.
You're gonna brush your teeth, and I'll help you.
No, Mom.
Yes.
No.
Come on.
No.
I'll help you.
No, Mom.
Stop. You're acting ridiculous.
No.
Come on.
No.
Do you want to go back to Missy and Tim's and not be able to stay here because you're not listening and doing as you're told? Come on.
No.
Please. Brooke, please come here.
No.
It's not okay to hit or spit. Hey, stop it. Brooke, stop it. You need to get over here right now.
No.
You need to brush your teeth.
No.
You need to brush your teeth. Please.
No.
I'm going to walk out of here. When you're done brushing your teeth, you can come out. Okay? No, you're going to brush your teeth.
No. No.
Brush your teeth.
No.
Brush your teeth.
No.
When you're ready, come out.
No.
Brush your teeth. You can brush them.
You can see the escalation occur. And the question, is this a bad mother? No, of course not. This mother is struggling. She's trying to do the right thing. She's trying to do what is right for her daughter. I want you as a group to think about how the previous clip made you feel, and then compare and contrast with how this one would make you feel. What's the mental state of the mother here? How is this mother responding to the behaviour that she sees? Is she calm and in control, or is she behaving emotionally?
Michael, look at me. That's enough, okay? Calm down. Michael. Look at me. Hey. Smile. Okay. That's good.
Now, this mother clearly knew her son, and she knew that his behaviour that she'd witnessed was as a result of his anxiety, but that if he slapped himself several times and he would count how many times he was slapping himself, then this would reassure him and he would stop. If she'd have responded in any other way, then that would have escalated the behaviour. I'm going to consider the key points and themes. Albert Ellis talks about the ABC of the emotions. We experience an event, which he calls A. We interpret that event, which he calls B. And then we feel an emotional response in line with that interpretation. And then is determined by our level of response, our stress, and many other factors. Turning to beliefs, mindsets, and behaviour, or the framing effect, Albert Ellis reminds us that people are not disturbed by things, but rather their view of things. But he was not the first to put forward this idea. Again, the philosopher Epictetus: men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about them. So this has now been referred to as the framing effect. Elizabeth Anscombe, who is a British philosopher and the author of a very famous book based on her philosophy around intention, commented, getting one another to do things without the application of physical force is a necessity for human life and far beyond what could be secured by those other means, that is, by physical restraint or physical persuasion. Turning to the theoretical basis of Synergy, the Synergy program, which we'll be talking about on another occasion. But Synergy was introduced as a way of understanding and responding to behaviours of concern with our Greek colleagues from Athens, and it was in response to a number of school exclusions in the Attica region of Greece at that time. And many of these exclusions were children who were refugees, children who were autistic, children with intellectual disabilities, children with ADHD. A whole range of issues would lay behind these school exclusions. So it's really a question of trying to get people to think more deeply about the situation that they faced. So looking at the theoretical base, then, if you look at these three main areas which surround a strong ethical foundation, they are psychology, society or sociology, and physiology. We know that there is good evidence from people like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Bandura, Ellis, Rogers, Milgram, Zimbardo, Janis. All of these people have contributed to this body of knowledge around individual and group behaviour. People who have studied society, people like Max Weber, Dilthey, Goffman, Wolfensberger, and the concept of Verstehen, that is deep understanding, making sense of experience, making sense of stigma, understanding the nature of power relationships. And then we saw the work of Donald Pfaff, of Bob Cummings, Andy MacDonald, other authors who are interested in stress, arousal, well-being, and mood. All of these things come together to combine an understanding of how we perceive and respond to behaviours. So there is a very strong underpinning, theoretical underpinning of an approach that we're going to talk about today. Having started in Greece, you would expect there to be a very strong ethical base and to understand the differences between right and wrong, but these to be modified in the light of more recent events to include issues relating to inclusion, social inclusion, participation, and acknowledgement and celebration of things that are different. Now, many of these issues are difficult. They're not easy to understand or comprehend, but they are worth the effort. And I think without a strong ethical underpinning, any approaches can soon run into difficulty. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman talks about two types of brain systems, which he describes as fast and slow, and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, goes into these in more detail, and it's based on the research that he did with Amos Tversky. The emotional brain versus the rational brain. So our two brains, then, our emotional brain, which is instinctive, versus our rational brain, which is our more reflective brain. And Kahneman calls these two systems, system one for the emotional brain, the fast thinking brain, and system two for the slower, more ponderous reflective brain. And making the point that system one is fast, it's automatic, you don't have to think about it, it's impulsive, it's instant, and it's unconsidered. So decisions that are taken in system one can often be bad decisions, or at least they're non-reflective decisions. Whereas system two, slower, reflective, sometimes difficult to acquire these skills, can be hesitant, and it is considered. Above all, it is considered, and that is reflective. And this switch between system 1 and system 2, if we can do that, it buys us time. It buys us time to reflect, it buys us time to think again, and it buys us time to plan. Now, system 2, the system 1, this is the fast system, associated with high stress and the fight, flight, and freeze phenomenon. It's associated with all of our biases that we bring along with us. We don't consider things in quite the same way. We are more biased. And we also see things like groupthink in system 1, whereas system 2 is slower, lower stress, causes us to pause and reflect, helps us with planning, helps us with self-awareness. System 1 versus system 2. System 2 can lead to stress behavior, high levels of arousal, being out of control, unplanned activity, whereas system 2, slower, calm, present, in control of ourselves, managing our biases, importantly, resisting our gut instinct, resisting our gut feelings to do things, say system 1 versus system 2. But it's not all bad news about system 1. System 1 isn't inherently bad. We need system 1. It has some useful purpose, system 1. It can get us out of trouble. We need it. It's useful. It's immediate. It's available to us. And it helps us to frame things which we understand to be dangerous or can be perilous. But there is a downside. It can also lead us, as I say, to bad decisions, impulsivity, poor judgment, anger. These are all products of system 1. Loss of self-control, and of course, high levels of stress. Whereas system 2, it's conscious, we are in control of ourselves more in system 2. It's rational, and it's planned, but it can take time. The skills that are required in system 2 might be quite difficult to achieve, and we need to be self-aware. And self-awareness is one of the things which is most important. It's a skill that we always need to work on, is to be aware of our own presence and the impact of that presence on other people. But with practice, with rehearsal, with constant reinforcement of our own behavior and being self-aware, these skills are possible to achieve. We also have to consider other influences on our behavior, social learning. We become what we see, the work of Albert Bandura, and the importance of role models. Also, the contribution that Max Weber and colleagues have made around Verstehen, this German word meaning to understand things deeply and to appreciate that some things we just cannot understand, we cannot comprehend merely by looking at them. We need a deeper understanding if that's possible. And some things will be outside of that frame of reference entirely. We need to accept that there are some things in this world we cannot understand, we will never understand. We also need to consider the effect of the language that we use and the terminology that we use on behavior, the framing effect. Looking at the issue of first impressions, and there is a great deal of scientific evidence to support the notion that first impressions, what we are told either orally or in writing, are incredibly powerful. What we perceive, what we see, our gut feeling about things, our instinct about things, can be very important in us framing that experience and in determining how we respond to it. We should also remember that emotion is very subjective, and the subjective experience of emotion is how we determine what we feel and what we think and how we behave. And that, remember, there are a limited number of basic emotions which are biologically determined, the products of evolution, but they're influenced by experience, by our narratives, our biases, our stress, and the culture in which we live. And first impressions are most powerful and enduring. I'll show you some images now, and I want you to consider your emotional responses to these pictures. What kind of people are these? There is a tendency, is there not, to assign identity through association. Now, one of these people is a male model. The other is an early picture of the Pope. But because we've grouped them all together, there is this association frame. We regard all of these people as the same kind of people. And no doubt there were terms that sprang to mind when you were looking at this picture. So I was saying earlier, we need to be mindful of our language. Some of the language and terminology that we use, or the descriptions that we use, we could call System 1 descriptions. And many of these words will be familiar to you. Words like complex, aggressive, obsessive, repetitive, ritualistic, and so on. They're very frequently used when we're describing people who present with behaviours of concern. Whereas if we change this, or we add to this, we switch to System 2 and we describe people as human or interesting, or that we admit that we don't understand them, or that we describe them as scared, or expert, or anxious, quirky, then this can lead to a different set of responses from us. So we're making that switch from System 1 into System 2. Looking at how our emotions shape our responses, we need to consider what is our response when we see this expression, this person, and how does this change things if it does? Or this, but it's their first impression which tends to be the most enduring and which will shape our response. It's all the same person, but depending on our first encounter will determine our mindset and how we respond and relate to this person. Turning to our emotions, biases and heuristics, and this term heuristics really relates to the sort of emotional shortcuts we take when we're thinking about or responding to familiar situations. Remembering our emotions are driven by our beliefs, and these are influenced by our biases and by these heuristics, the shorthand way of which we think about things. Now, biases and heuristics are very much associated with System 1, and so we need to take a step back and pause and think about how do we switch into System 2. System 2 allows time for emotional grounding and for a more rational state to emerge. Something described as the availability heuristic is something that is very easy to imagine. And this is to do with gut feelings, how we feel about something instinctively, or things which spring to mind when we hear a particular expression or someone talking about a particular person in a particular way. Might be influenced by a whole range of things to do with beliefs or politics or religion, or all sorts of things can intrude. But it is very much the product of System 1. It is emotional. It might be right, but often it isn't right, and we need to just get into this reflective space and think again. One of the examples that Daniel Kahneman produces, it concerns a young man called Steve, and he's described as an individual by a neighbour as follows. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with very little interest in people or in the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul, he has a need for order and structure, and a passion for detail. So the question is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? If you consider that for a moment, what's your instinctive response to that question, given the information that you've just been provided with about Steve? What's your response to that? Because it really is based on nothing. There's no right or wrong answer. It could be determined by a whole host of other factors which have nothing to do with the description. For example, if Steve lived in the centre of a city, or whether Steve lives in the middle of a rural community. So we need to be very cautious about how we make use of this information, which reflects our biases and the heuristics, things that we associate with certain types of personality. Further example of how our first impressions can help us to frame things. Again, it's a quote from Kahneman. Consider this. James is an interesting young man with a great sense of humour. He is happiest when he is pursuing his interest in dinosaurs. He does not use speech to communicate, but with patience he can make himself understood. Contrast that statement with this, where we have a very different frame. And here we're saying James is typically autistic, socially aloof, and is uncommunicative. He shows narrow, repetitive interest and an obsession with dinosaurs. He is ritualistic and resistant to change in his rigid routine. He becomes agitated if this is interrupted. Now we're describing the same person in the same situation, but in very different ways. It's here that we turn to a very practical application, and that is to know what is within your control and what is not. And this goes to the heart of some of the underlying philosophical ideas which led to the setting up of the Synergy program in Greece, which has influenced a great deal of this talk. So it's to know what is within your control and what isn't. So we first need to consider those things which are within our control. And those include things like our thoughts, our actions, our beliefs. All these things are within our control. What we do is usually within our control. And then we consider things which are not within our control. And not within our control is pretty much everything else, from the weather to our health, to our reputation, what other people think of it. None of these things are within our control. We can behave in ways which might influence some of these things, but they're not within our control. So to recap on some of these points then, System 1 is emotional. That's the main focus of what we need to recognize is System 1 and our System 1 responses, which are in essence fight, flight, freeze, or to maintain our comfort zone. That is to reinforce our biases, our established biases and heuristics, that we like to think that we're right about something. So we seek out information that reinforces our view. But remember that making the switch from System 1 to System 2 buys us time. System 2 being rational, our rational selves. That's the main focus of System 2, where we reflect, where we plan, where we develop self-control, and where we can challenge some of our beliefs. And some of those beliefs might be right, but often they're wrong, and we need to reflect on these things and understand them and challenge them. By challenge them, I don't mean that we contradict everything that we believe. We just reflect on it. Am I really seeing this? Is this really happening? Or could it be that I'm responding to a set of predetermined biases or false beliefs? So to recap then on ABC, remember we experience an event, which is A, we interpret that event as either threatening or hostile or pleasant or whatever, and then we feel an emotional response in line with that interpretation. And then that leads us on to do what we are likely to do. So just worth reflecting for a moment on ABC, our experience, how we interpret it, and how we respond. Now I'm going to try and bring it all together now with this short exercise. And I want you to imagine that you're driving home from work and you're suddenly aware of the fact that the car behind is flashing its lights at you. You're being tailgated. That is, a car is really close behind, flashing his lights now. And then you see the driver, and he's on his mobile phone. He's got a reverse baseball cap on, and he's on his mobile phone. What do you think? What do you think about this person? What system are you in? I would argue that you're probably in system 1, which is fight or flight, and you would want to take some sort of action. What are you thinking based on what you can see? We now need to think about what you can't see, and that is his wife, who he's on the phone to. He's on the telephone to the hospital because you can't see his wife is on the back seat of the car, and she's in labour. She's hemorrhaging, and he wants to get her to the hospital. And the doctor has said, you've got to get her here very quickly, otherwise she's in real danger. So you're in his way. He's trying to get you out of his way. He can't communicate this to you except by flashing his lights. So you need to reflect and get into system 2, because you will never ever know the reason why some people behave as they do. So we need to take a step back from system 1 into system 2. So what are your thoughts about this guy now? The same or different? Because this is an example of how we often frame events and behave in ways which are entirely related to that framing. So we need to switch from system 1 into system 2. And we need to reflect on, could this be verstehen? Verstehen is hidden behavior, hidden things. We need to develop a deeper understanding as to why things might be happening, things which could be totally beyond our comprehension. But the one thing we can do is to control our behavior, and rather than display aggressive gestures to this guy or feel bad about him, we can simply get out of his way. We could think, well, he must have his reasons for doing this. I will just get out of his way. I will control what I do. Some examples now from the schools in Greece of some of the experiences of, in most parts of the world, we found that the focus, particularly for children and young people who present with behaviours of concern, the focus tends to be on that young person. Nothing wrong with that. But often this can lead to the situation where we don't consider the impact of our own behaviour on this young person. So with the work in Greece, a different approach was taken, in part because of the resources that were available to support young people was pretty stretched, and so they didn't have access to the same level of clinical support as is available in some parts of the world. And so the focus was switched from the young person onto the teacher. And in that, we were very keen to look at a number of areas. In terms of the narrative that the teachers had experienced, the influences, what influences that they came under, and the levels of stress that those teachers were experiencing at any given time. So picking out these three areas then, and surrounding those areas with a support system in the form of mentoring, was seen to make a significant impact both on teacher behaviour but also on teacher stress and well-being long term. Once we'd done that, we could then turn our attention, or the teacher could turn their attention on the young person, looking at the same factors relating to the narrative that was around the influences on their way of being, and the stress levels. So we could get the teachers to think about the young people in the same way as they were thinking about themselves. So again, all of these things were picked out for support through a very similar kind of a system where the teacher was looking to change their behaviour rather than to focus on child behaviour. So what does this look like in practice? If we took the individual teacher and gave them a framework for thinking about how they could change and manage their behaviour. If you remember, we started off by saying whose behaviour, whose concern. This is very much about teacher responses, teacher behaviour. And it was helpful for them to think about this in three ways. The first is the level of awareness, being in control of themselves, switching from system 1 to system 2. The second bit is to really stand back and examine all of these things in much more detail, to reflect. And these things, when added together, result in the third part, which is the plan. Have a plan, stick to the plan. Part of that plan is remaining calm and in control. So these are very practical things that teachers can do. Further example concerned one of the teachers at one of the schools in Attica, Josefina, who recognised that she was very stressed, and in a discussion with her mentor teacher, she developed a plan for how she would work with Costas. Now, Costas was an autistic student prone to what they call meltdowns if things were not going well for him. So rather than have a plan for Costas, which had been tried on multiple occasions and found not to work, she was encouraged by her mentor to develop a plan for herself. And that plan would also include other people working with Costas. And I'm grateful to Dr. Katerina Laskaridis for sharing this. And this is the plan for Josefina, not the plan for Costas. You'll see that it's very clear and very systematic as to how she would manage her behaviour and help staff to manage their behaviour when they were working with Costas. So this is not a plan for Costas. This is a plan for Josefina, the teacher. And I think that this original way of working with children and young people in Greece has a lot to commend it. You know, that it's controlling what you can control, and that is yourself. Further example of how this framing came from a family support program, which catered for families where the child presented with behaviours of concern. At the start of a 6-month program, parents were asked to identify all of the issues where they needed some help. And one family only had one, and that was that they were able to attend church as a family. The family worker, the person working with them in Denmark, asked what was preventing this. Their answer, pointing to their child, was him, Eric, and his behaviour. Now, a short summary of what does Eric do said, well, he makes noises, he runs up and down the church. You see, he's autistic and he can't keep still. He spoils it for other people, that is the other churchgoers. And although we love him and we really want us to be together at church, it's embarrassing for us. And the worker said, so you think that other people in the church disapprove? The parent said, yes, we get these strange looks. And the worker said, and you think those looks are disapproving? And the parent said, yes, of course. The worker said, do you mind if I check this with the priest to see how he feels about this? The parent said, okay, but I'm not sure it will help. The worker subsequently met with the priest. He expressed dismay that the parent should feel this way and said that all were welcome in his church. In fact, he said that if people felt like this, they were not welcome in his church, but that the family most certainly would. And he said that he would raise it with the parents' permission. He would raise the issue with the congregation at the church, which he did. Now, the churchgoers, the congregation, expressed sadness and surprise that these parents felt this way. They wanted the priest to ensure that the family knew that how they were feeling, and that he was very welcome to come to the church, and that they were desperate for the priest to convey their feelings to the family. So the priest shared the news with the family, and they went to church as agreed the next Sunday, and they were greeted warmly. Eric behaved as he usually did, making noises and periodically leaving his seat to run into the aisle of the church. When he did this, the family received reassuring gestures of acceptance and support from the other churchgoers, from the congregation. And following the service, they were further reassured and warmly welcomed. After this, they attended the church regularly. Eric had not changed, but they had. They'd changed the way that they framed Eric's behaviour and and how they behaved in the church. So they had achieved their goal of attending the church as a family, but not through changing Eric's behaviour, by changing how they thought about it and how they responded. They had reframed the issue. In an interesting development after this, it was reported that Eric's behaviour had in fact changed. He became more relaxed. He remained in his seat, and they reflected that this might be because they were no longer transmitting their stress to Eric, and the church became more familiar and relaxed for all through familiarity. But in any event, they felt that it didn't matter whether Eric behaved or not, because their goal had been met. So just to reflect on this then with an exercise, it's sometimes good to think about what we can control and what we can't, and can we control ourselves in any given situation. So imagine you are approaching a stressful situation. if you can practice dealing with this in your mind before that situation arises, or what the likely situation is, and be mindful of your own likely triggers or stress points, telling yourself that they won't provoke a response. Driving is a good example of this. How biases affect driving. Memories internalized to form a strategy. Sometimes this can become a culture. Think about what might be on the back seat, if you remember the driving example, or out of sight. And think about those other things which can affect our judgments. Stress, alcohol, personality, culture, our own biases, all of these things can be influential. And importantly, have a plan. And have a plan not for what everyone else is going to do, but have a plan for what you are going to do. So, turning to the take-home points again. Stress causes emotional responses. Emotional responses can cause bad decisions, and those bad decisions can cause stress, and we need to switch from the emotional way of responding into the rational way of responding. Because remember, it's up to us. If we change the way we think, if we change the story, if we change our behavior, then we might change the outcome. And finally, some words from Henry James. 3 things in life are important. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. Never underestimate the value of kindness. With that, I'd like to thank you very much. And this is the end of this session. Thank you.